Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar with Dr. Allison Mulcahy. My name is Carol Bender. I am the nurse practitioner and the founder of Joy Wellness Partners, and I am honored to introduce again Dr. Allison Mulcahy, our supervising physician with several fellowships that bring to the table all of her expertise in helping us understand the topic of today's webinar, which is the gut, what's up with our gut, the microbiome, what is the microbiome, and we're just so excited to listen in, and she's going to introduce all of the training that she's had to bring this specialty to light today, and welcome everyone for participating and watching along.
So thanks so much for joining us. And as Carol probably just mentioned, although I couldn't hear her, we're going to talk about gut health and your microbiome this week. So first of all, to start, I would love everyone in their chat box to just write some symptoms that they think can be caused by a disrupted microbiome. So you can just put it in the chat box, and then we'll go through the talk, and then at the end, we'll see what you've learned during this little chat here. And microbiome, obviously, we could probably spend the next week full time talking about it. So it's a pretty complicated topic. We're going to try and do our best in 15 minutes and then have some time for some questions after that. So what we're going to cover is, what is the gut? What does the gut do? Why is gut health important? What is the microbiome? What is leaky gut? How do you test your gut? How do you treat your gut? And what can you do today for your gut? And then we'll leave some time for some questions at the end. So what is the gut? The main organs for the gut, the gut's basically a tube that goes from your mouth all the way through to your anus on the other end. And so the main organs for that on the left side of the screen here are your mouth, your pharynx, your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines, your rectum, and your anus. Pardon me. But there's also a bunch of accessory organs, as you can see on this diagram here, including the salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So pretty important structures in our body. What does the gut do? The gut's a big barrier for us. That's the Berlin Wall down there. It protects us against substances invading us and trying to get into our body and bloodstream. It's also super important for energy. It allows us to break down food into nutrients. About 90% of the body's serotonin is made in the gut. Serotonin's our happy hormone. So if we don't have a healthy gut, we're not going to have enough serotonin. We're probably not going to be as happy as we could be. The gut's also our second brain. That's something a lot of people haven't heard. So our enteric nervous system, which is basically all the nerves that surround our gut, actually have more neurons than our spinal cord and our peripheral nervous system together, which is pretty mind-boggling. When we think about the connection of the gut and the brain, it's profound, and we're learning more and more. We've talked about the vagus nerve before. So the brain is connected to the gut via the vagus nerve. And if you look at these diagrams here, there's a ton of communication. If we have an unhealthy gut, it's going to send messages to the brain that are going to potentially inflame the brain and vice versa. So if you have a head injury, that can make you have a disrupted microbiome. If you have a disrupted microbiome, that can make you depressed. Everything's connected. Of note, the gut is actually sending more messages to the brain than the brain is sending to the gut. So I think that's really interesting, and that really is important in terms of how we approach healing. So this is a full human. Everything's connected. This is kind of how we oftentimes think of ourselves in conventional medicine. So if you have, an ear pain, you go to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. If you have an eye problem, you go to the ophthalmologist. If you have a foot problem, you go to the podiatrist. But clearly, we're whole humans on the left. And I think what we look at when we're integrative practitioners is how everything is connected. And we're just learning more and more that the gut is really at the root of so many conditions and symptoms. So I think a better question might be, what doesn't the gut do? The gut really impacts everything. And this is that's actually a little intestine superhero character that I found down there. And I think our gut really is so profoundly important for us and does so many things. Makes us happy, makes us healthy. We can't really underestimate the impact of it or overestimate. Why is this important even more so now than ever is that gut problems as just gut problems alone are an epidemic in this country. So 60% of adults experience GERD symptoms, which is basically acid reflux, within a 1-year period. 30% of adults experience those symptoms within a 1-week period. 3/4 of adults are obese in America. And Nexium, which is one of the common drugs that's used for gastroesophageal reflux disease, netted $6.3 billion in 2010, which was the second highest grossing pharmaceutical drug out there that year. Now, there have been some biologic drugs since then that are definitely netting more money than that, but this is just to show that this is really a problem that we need to address. IBS affects 15% of the population. Let's move on to the microbiome for a little bit here. So the microbiome is comprised of 100 trillion organisms from 1,000 different species. So just sit on that for a second. We actually have 10 times more microbes in the human body than we have human cells. So we're actually more microbes than we are human in many ways. And microbes have 100 times more genes than we have in the human genome. And so what we're learning more and more is that our health is really dependent on our microbiome. And what we've seen is that if you take, for example, if you take the microbiome, if you take a stool from someone who is obese, for example, and unhealthy, and you do a fecal transplant, put that stool in someone who is perfectly healthy, we find that they actually will become obese and develop symptoms. And the opposite is true. And we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg, I think, in terms of our understanding of all this. And it's very exciting in terms of the potential for health. And I just said that, but I want everyone to just kind of think about this again. On a cellular level, we are more microbe than we are human, which is just nothing short of remarkable. So what does the microbiome do? It does a lot of things similar to what does the gut do? And they're all interconnected, but I wanted to differentiate between gut and microbiome. So the microbiome promotes normal GI function. It protects us against infection. It regulates metabolism. And it's actually a home to the majority of the immune cells in our body. The gut-associated lymphatic tissue is the immune system in our gut, and it's a huge percentage of our immune system. And so that's why we know that if we have unhealthy guts, unhealthy microbiomes, it's going to affect our immune system. In functional and integrative medicine, we like to talk a lot about the root cause of symptoms rather than just band-aiding the symptoms. And so what does this look like? I would say probably upwards of 60 to 80% of people that I see have gut problems at the root of whatever they come in for. So someone might come in for a nagging knee injury, for example, that they injured it 5 years ago and it gets a little better and then it gets worse again. Maybe they've got some changes when we ultrasound them. Maybe they've got some osteoarthritis. And then when we dig into it further, the problem is actually coming from their gut. If their gut is inflamed, it's going to cause inflammation everywhere. So here's a list of some of the conditions that are known to be linked to a disrupted gut microbiome. And the more I dig into this, the more I am starting to really realize that pretty much everything is linked to a disrupted gut microbiome. And these are just a few, but autoimmune diseases are classic. We know that because of that connection between the vagus nerve, with the gut and the brain, we know that depression, anxiety, PTSD is going to be exacerbated if the microbiome is not healthy, and vice versa. If people have PTSD, that's going to disrupt the microbiome. So it's this constant balance that when it gets out of balance, that we develop all these conditions that we call diseases. And dis-ease is really just not optimal metabolic processes in our body. When things aren't working right, we develop all these symptoms that we have labeled as disease conditions. So where'd you get your microbiome? Believe it or not, we get our microbiome from our moms. And so when we you know, in a normal spontaneous vaginal delivery, when we pass through the canal, that's our first inoculation of microbes. And that's why we've found that babies that are born C-section actually are more likely to develop things like asthma and allergies and autoimmunity, because they don't get that initial inoculation. That little picture on the right is showing all the different bugs that just take up home in your gut there. And I think another thing that is important to consider with this is, you know, in terms of getting your microbiome, if your mom has been unhealthy or had struggled with allergies, asthma, things like that, you just inherited her microbiome. And so you are likely to have all those things as well. We know that there are many different bacteria that are associated with various different conditions like autoimmunity. And so we know if you have those bacteria in you, there's probably a good chance that you got them from your mom. And that's one reason, you know, we talk about genetics a lot in terms of why, you know, if my mom has allergies, why I would get allergies, but maybe it has nothing to do with genetics in some cases. Maybe it's the microbiome. And that's actually super exciting because we are getting more and more tools to optimize a microbiome. We can't change our genetics as of now. It's possible in the future we can, but as of right now, you know, what genetics you're born with those. But we are learning that we can change a whole lot of other things, including our microbiome. So what are some things that influence who's taking up residence in our gut as adults? You know, we get whatever microbiome we get when we're born from our mom, and then what we eat, what medications we take, how we live our lives, whether we have infections, what we're doing for exercise. These things are all going to influence whether we have a healthy microbiome or an unhealthy microbiome. So some things that are going to, I like to use the word, some things that are going to drop a nuke on your microbiome. Antibiotics, that's an obvious one. So antibiotics are going to kind of, they're going to kill good bacteria and bad bacteria indiscriminately. And oftentimes, you know, you could think, well, but they're killing the bad bacteria as well, so that's good. Unfortunately, what ends up happening though is some bacteria that are particularly strong will probably live after the antibiotics, and Clostridium difficile is a classic one. So, you know, we take really strong antibiotics and then we get C. diff infections because that bacteria is then allowed to grow when the other ones are not. Other things, food poisoning, anytime we get some sort of infectious diarrhea, whether it's from water, food, or any sort of, you know, a lot of times it's fecal oral transmission is what we use. So if you're, you know, traveling in a country that maybe doesn't have sanitation quite as good as ours, and our microbiomes are pretty messed up because we haven't been exposed to as many things and we don't necessarily eat enough fiber. And so then we can get really sick, and then bugs that we don't want to be there can take up residence. H. pylori is a classic one. So H. pylori is a bug that takes up residence higher up in our GI tract, in our stomach and duodenum. And what can happen is if we've got H. pylori in there, our stomach acid levels are going to go down. That's going to affect everything downstream. And so what that looks like is undigested food, and then extra bacteria can start to grow in places that they shouldn't be hanging out, like the small intestine. And we can do another talk at some point on SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Basically what happens is our colon is where we want all these bugs to be in general, and they help us absorb food and digest food. And if they are sneaking up into our small intestine, we get all sorts of symptoms. Giardia is another one. Where I work, I see a ton of people that have done a lot of camping and maybe don't always treat their water. And Giardia is a bug that can cause all sorts of inflammation and long-term problems. So identifying these things are very important. And this is also important when it comes to regenerative medicine. I tell people a lot of times that we can't build a bridge in a war zone. And what I mean by that is if you've got Giardia and H. pylori and a bunch of other bugs that are causing inflammation and problems in your gut, I can give a regenerative injection to you in your shoulder. It's not going to heal as good because you're getting all this inflammation coming out of your gut. So basically, I'm trying to put the fire out in your shoulder by putting an injection in there. And if you've got all those bugs in there, it's almost like the bugs are putting propane on the fire in your shoulder. So super important that we kind of clean things up before we do those injections as much as possible, or do it at the same time. But if we don't address it, the injections just won't work as well. Leaky gut. Most people have probably heard something about leaky gut at this point. And the way I think of leaky gut is if I am the immune system and these are two gut cells, normally they should be nice and tight together. And like in that diagram there, you can see the tight junctions there show that normally the cells should be nice and tight together. And then if you look at the diagram there, on one side of the diagram is the blood, and that's the immune system, that's like me. And then on the other side is all the stuff going through the gut. And so in this case, like if those cells get a little bit loose, then things going through the gut, like gluten, organisms, et cetera, are going to get responded to by the immune system. And that's going to cause even more inflammation, which is going to cause those cells to open up even more. It's kind of this positive feedback loop. It's caused by a whole ton of things. And then once those tight junctions open up, then it's kind of this positive feedback loop that's hard to stop and kind of causes more and more inflammation. I like to use the analogy of like a tile floor. So if you imagine that those tiles are those cells and the grout is the tight junctions in between. If the grout cracks, then what ends up happening is you can get water down below your tile floor and you can get mold under there. And so there are things that we can do to kind of temporize the situation to prevent the water from getting in there. And then there's the solution, which is, in this case, might be putting more grout in there, potentially pulling up the tiles. So same idea with the gut. We can do things to kind of temporize the situation and minimize inflammation, but we really want to get to the bottom and fix the situation. So why is leaky gut a problem? So, inflammation is a problem for pretty much any disease process, but we know that increased inflammation is also going to increase your food tolerance, increase your allergies in general, increase your autoimmunity. And the reason for that is, again, I'm the immune system, here's those cells, here's your intestine. It's just a one layer of cell really that separates the food and everything going through your intestine from your immune system. And so if I'm the immune system and it's too leaky, it's almost like a dog barking at shadows. I'm going to react to everything going through there. And that's going to cause inflammation. It's going to cause me to react to things that I shouldn't be. And that's basically what autoimmunity and allergies are, is our immune system reacting to things that it shouldn't be reacting to. And it's kind of a cycle that just kind of gets worse and worse. And the other thing that happens when our gut is inflamed is we're not absorbing nutrients well. If we don't have enough nutrients, our metabolic systems aren't going to work well. And it just sort of ends up being this spiral. And so people might come in saying, hey, I've gotten diagnosed with, psoriasis or rheumatoid arthritis. And maybe they have never even had any gut symptoms, but their imbalanced gut is at the root of what's going on. And so if you look at different areas of the body, this diagram is just nice to show you how leaky gut can affect pretty much everywhere in our body. And so if we don't address it, again, like we can give medications, we can do regenerative injections, but if we don't address that underlying problem, it's still gonna keep creeping up on us. Inflammaging is a word that I'm starting to see more and more, and it is related to just inflammation in general, but particularly I think is important in the gut, because the gut is where so much inflammation originates. And what we know is that increased inflammation in our body is going to speed up aging, and decreased inflammation is going to slow down aging. So if you take nothing else from this talk right now, just take that decreasing inflammation is going to decrease your aging process. I talked a little bit a minute ago about there's ways to kind of mitigate, the leaky gut, just kind of like you can mitigate the tiles. So just like, with a tile, you can put a sealant on it and maybe not actually replace the grout, but it'll prevent the water from going in there. There's some supplements that I like to use to give people that basically, again, back to that, these are two cells and this is a tight junction, basically coats the cells and coats the tight junction to prevent the immune system, me being the immune system, from reacting to the food and things going through. And so there's probably a lot of supplements out there. The ones that I like to use, and I don't have any sort of connection with any of these companies, these are just supplements that I found work really well. Megamucosa is a great one that has immune globulins that kind of helps the gut to heal and helps to coat it. And then supplements with glutamine, and the Thorin Entermin and the Metagenics Glutagenics are a couple that I like. And then a peptide that I really like that helps with gut health is called BPC 157, and that stands for Body Protection Compound 157. That's injectable. But these are things that, you know, even if I don't know for sure what's going on with people's guts and how I'm going to treat it, I like to give people this right off the bat, just to kind of stop the bleeding, so to speak, just to cut down the inflammation. And usually people start to feel better pretty quickly. It's important, though, to know that this is not fixing the underlying problem. So just like if we were to paint the grout with some sealant, but not actually, sorry, paint the tiles with some sealant, but not actually fix the grout, it's not totally taking care of the problem. It's the same idea. So we still need to address the underlying problem. So it's a Band-Aid versus really the complete getting to the root cause. So how the heck do we test our microbiome? It's really just like you poop in a little fry container, and then you take a little piece of your poop, different parts of your poop, and then you send it into a lab. There's tons of different labs that will check your microbiome. I'm constantly trying to figure out which one is the best, and each of them will tell you that they're best. I don't have any connections with any of them. These are some of the ones that I'm familiar with on here. Some of them have better interfaces for patients. Some of them I think are more specific, but you know, we use all of these, and we can test your microbiome, and then from there give you some suggestions in terms of treatment options. And when I think of treating, I really like this 5 R's description here. And so it's remove, replace, re-inoculate, repair, and rebalance. But basically what we're trying to do, if you look on the right here, we're trying to get rid of the bad bacteria and bring in good bacteria. So just to go through it, so we want to kick out the bad bacteria. So, you know, if you imagine like you've got you got a bad tenant who's making a mess in your house, you're going to want to get them out of there. So you can think of these bad bacteria as kind of bad tenants, and they're making a mess of your intestines and your gut. And so in order to get them out, what we use are herbal antimicrobial protocols for 60 days. And depending on the type of bug that's in there, we use different antimicrobials. We can also use pharmaceuticals, but pharmaceuticals, as I mentioned earlier, are kind of like dropping a nuke on the gut. And so if you can imagine, like, you know, if there are special forces people that were assigned to kill some person, it would be much better to just go in and, you know, get that one person rather than dropping a bomb on the entire town. And I think what we're doing when we take big pharmaceutical antibiotics, we will kill the bad bacteria, but we're going to be killing so many bacteria that it's going to be more disruptive to the gut, generally speaking. Then we want to clean the house, right? So we want to invite new residents in. So we want to make our gut such that it's inviting to the good bacteria. So how do we do that? One thing is a lot of times people need to take some enzymes to help them digest their food better. When I mentioned earlier about H. pylori, if that's hanging out in your stomach, what's going to happen is you're not going to be digesting your food really well. And then that food is going to allow other bad bacteria to grow downstream. And so by adding some digestive enzymes in there, it digests the food so that food can't feed the bacteria in the wrong place. And then the megamucosa and the enteromin that I talked about, or the glutagenics to kind of coat and help those cells heal, is another way to make the house welcome for the good bacteria. And then once you've made the house nice, then you want to invite the new guests in. So how do we do that? Prebiotics and probiotics. And I think that what I have run into is a lot of people take probiotics, but not a ton of people really seem to understand or take prebiotics. And I think prebiotics are probably more important than probiotics. And what the heck is the difference? So probiotics are actually the good bugs, and prebiotics are what the good bugs feed on. And so what we want to do is have plenty of good food for the good bugs so that the good bugs come and hang out there. Because if we keep taking probiotics and taking the good bugs, but we don't feed them, they're not going to set up home there. They're going to pass right out. Generally, I use supplements like this initially, but then I really like to move as much as possible with all of our treatments to people just eating healthy foods and eating lots of fermentable foods to bring in the probiotics. Prebiotics are foods that are high in fiber, so eating a high fiber diet. So ideally, we kind of fix the gut and then as much as possible get off of the supplements. They're expensive, and if you eat a healthy diet, once you've fixed your gut, you should be good to go. And then the next thing we need to do is we want to keep that home good for the bugs. So we want to make sure that the good bugs stay there. And so by doing that, I like to think about the 4 pillars. And 4 pillars in general that I always like to talk to people about are sleep, diet, exercise, and stress. So if any of those are out of balance, so say I check someone, their microbiome is perfect, and then they only sleep 4 hours a night for the next 2 months, I can almost guarantee that that's going to disrupt their microbiome. And any of these things can negatively influence the microbiome. Exercise is important as well in terms of the dose. So I get a lot of people where I work that exercise too much, and I have to tell them to exercise less. So too much is a problem as well. And same with any of these things. So, too much food is bad, too little food is bad. Probably, I don't know of anyone that really gets too much sleep, but we want to have the perfect amount of all these things. And then just by kind of treating all these good bacteria well, they'll stay there. So just like I was talking about the fiber, fermented foods, and those 4 pillars. And really the 4 pillars are what are going to keep us healthy. And that's going to help keep the inflammation down and keep our gut healthy. So thanks so much for listening. And I'm curious if everyone could at this point just put a little something in the chat box about what symptoms can be caused by a disrupted microbiome now. And you can just to do that. And then just in terms of if you're listening to this and you're thinking, gosh, like this definitely fits me, and I'm pretty sure I have a gut problem, and you're wondering how to even start, 60 to 80% of people probably do have some gut dysbiosis. And so what can you do? You can take those supplements I was talking about to kind of decrease that gut permeability and decrease symptoms now. And that can be started right away. Like if you have glutamine at the health store next to you, you can start that right now. And then we can check your poop, and then we can see what's in there, and then we can design a protocol to treat and heal your gut. And it's the reason it's not kind of a one size fits all is depending on what bugs are in there, we treat it differently. So if you have fungal overgrowth, that's going to be different than, if you have parasites or if you have H. pylori. And so it's important to really see what's going on. And then it's also important to retest later as well to make sure that we've optimized it as much as possible. Date is next month. We're going to do a health coaching webinar, and then on May 7th, we'll do that on May 7th. And then on May 20th, we'll do kind of a 35,000 foot view of hormones. And if you could let us know other things that you would like to learn about, you can put them in the chat box, and we'll try and do our best to talk about them. Any questions?
So a lot of people were sending in some questions. Larry was a gentleman asking, do I have leaky gut? I have omeprazole that I take every day to handle my acid. And I also have frequent loose stools and a lot of gas. So
yeah, great question, Larry. So first of all, I'd say anyone that's on omeprazole, I would like you to get off that ASAP. And the reason for that is actually decreasing your stomach acid. I know I'll get to your question, but that's decreasing your stomach acid. And like I was mentioning, if your stomach acid is lower, what's going to happen is you're not going to be digesting your food well. And then that's going to cause other problems downstream. And I would guess with pretty high certainty that anyone that's on omeprazole because of those symptoms probably does have leaky gut.
And does H. pylori get tested through the stool testing as well?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So H. pylori is something that we test for in conventional medicine as well. And the tests that are done at your doctor's office, if you've ever gotten that tested, are far less sensitive than the tests that we do. So the tests that we do actually look for the DNA of the bugs in your stool. And so it's going to be way more sensitive. And so I found several people that had other tests done that didn't test for H. pylori. and they did gut protocols and they weren't really getting better. It's because we hadn't addressed the H. pylori. We always have to address the upstream things first. So great question.
Do you see it commonly missed in the traditional medical world that people will be misdiagnosed or just that this is some layer that hasn't been uncovered? Do you feel like this is something that is often the first time that people have ever heard this when they come to you?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So I think, unfortunately, we just don't learn about this in regular medical school. And so I'll tell you, a few years ago, probably 2 years ago, not even that long ago, I had a patient who came in who got diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis and was having a bunch of diarrhea as well. And I was trying to put it together. And what it is the thyroid hormone and gluten and casein, which is the primary protein in dairy, they all look almost identical under the microscope. So if the body is attacking gluten, it's also likely to attack the thyroid. And that was like a real eye opener for me in terms of connections. And so the more I dig into this, the more I learn that everything's so connected, and most people just don't have not had that experience from their doctors. And most of my friends who are conventional doctors, when I talk to them about this, they're open to learning about it, but they haven't heard about it either. And so back to that picture where I had kind of the person divided up into a bunch of little slices, if you go to your gastroenterologist, they're going to think about your gut. If you go to your neurologist, they're going to just think about your head, but really it's all connected. And if we don't address the gut, you're going to have migraines, chances are. So, so yeah, absolutely. I think most people have not had that experience, and most people kind of look at me weird when I suggest that they check their poop. And another thing that I didn't mention that I just thought of is that this is super interesting. Much like STDs, we share our microbiome with our partners. So if you have a partner who, for example, has a lot of autoimmune conditions, and chances are they probably don't have a really healthy gut, there's probably a good chance that you've been starting to get some of their bad bacteria from them. You might be giving them some good bacteria as well, but I suggest usually if someone's got pretty significant dysbiosis, that their partner get tested and treated as well.
That's super good advice.
Yeah.
Wow. Same as the mom passing it down to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So another question that was asked through the chat was, is this process something that takes a long time?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So it is a really laborious process. I'm not going to lie about this. And, it requires a fair amount of commitment, both monetarily and time-wise. And it's like most of my patients do get kind of frustrated, and it usually does take about 60 days for the first round. And it requires taking a bunch of supplements a couple of times a day. And then what we do is we let people take just the probiotics and the prebiotics and the mending powders for another 30 days. And then we usually give them another 30 days and then retest. And sometimes people need to do this a few times, but, I tell people that it's taken you 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decades to kind of get your microbiome to where it is. And so realistically, if people have pretty disrupted microbiomes, I usually say it's going to take probably 2 years really to get it back to optimal, but you should start to see a difference after that first round, but you might need to do another one. I hope in the future with fecal transplants that maybe we'll have a way where in the future it's like you can take a pill with all the perfect microbiome in it, and that will seed you, and that's all you need, because it is laborious now.
Yeah. Is there so many things. This is awesome. This is just bringing so many topics. My one friend had a C. diff treatment, or C. diff that treatments failed, and she eventually got the fecal transplant, and that was what saved her. So is there, if she had come to us sooner, you would have been able to maybe help her, because right now fecal transplant is only on the market for C. diff. Yeah. It's just like we're excited about what the future holds.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll just make it a lot easier for people, and I think a lot less expensive. But yeah, there have been some problems with fecal transplants with the rollout, and so I think right now they're being really careful with it, but I think there's a ton of potential.
Yeah. I think there was another question about the like simultaneous process of treatments, and is it possible to do 2 or 3 things at once? Like if you're gonna work on your, regenerative medicine at the same time as your gut, is that okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, the short answer is yes. And the way that I would approach that is to start taking those supplements that I talked about that would kind of heal those tight junctions right away to kind of cut down that inflammation. So, if you came in with shoulder pain, we're going to do an injection on you, you can start taking those. That's going to decrease your inflammation. Then we can kind of dig further.
And I guess that would be the same for an autoimmune disease, like help support the thyroid while you're reducing the inflammation, for example.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of thyroid, so the active form of thyroid hormone is T3, and the inactive form, which is what our thyroid organ produces, is T4, and most of T4 is converted to T3 peripherally, and the majority of that in the gut. And if we're inflamed, it doesn't convert as well. So that's another thing. If someone's been diagnosed with just low thyroid, whether it's autoimmune or not, once we heal the gut, usually we find that our body is converting thyroid hormone better. There might be a little delay if you've been taking hormones for a while because of the feedback on that. But ideally, our approach with all this, hopefully, is to get your body back to doing what it does well, which is healing itself. We just get in the way with all of the pesticides and stress and not getting enough sleep and all of that. So, our bodies are amazing at healing themselves. If you cut yourself, you don't do anything, it's just going to heal on its own. So we just need to get out of its way and help it to do what it wants to do.
Thank you so much. That's a great conclusive statement. Let's work on supporting our body's natural healing capabilities. That's all why we're here. So thank you so much once again.
Yeah,
and
thanks, Carol.
Stay tuned for next week or next month, a couple weeks from now. You said May.
Yeah, I'll put it back on there. Sorry about the, let's see, right
there we go. Yeah, our next one will be kind of, even building on how you can do this as a team with a health coach to help your gut to heal and get some support so you don't get discouraged along the way with a team approach. And then we'll also be chatting about other topics about hormones and building on how the gut interacts with hormones again next month too. So thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much.